One important defendant was missing from the Nuremberg trials. While the war was raging, millions of people around the world dreamed of hanging him. We are talking about Hitler. Getting to the man who unleashed World War II was a dream shared by politicians in their offices. It seemed obvious that capturing him would be the first thing done after victory. But the Führer of the Third Reich managed to slip away. According to the official version, he committed suicide. According to the unofficial version, he escaped to South America, just like many other high-ranking Nazis. On April 30th, 1945, Soviet troops had already broken into Berlin. The assault on the Reichstag was underway. Hitler understood that everything was over. He had already written his will. He knew that the mutilated body of his ally Mussolini had been hung upside down in a public square by partisans, together with the body of his mistress. Of course, Hitler understood that the same fate awaited him, if not something even worse. He wanted to leave this world on his own terms. His last refuge, the so-called Führerbunker, was a complex of underground structures located in the garden of the Reich Chancellery at a depth of 5 meters. The Nazi elite had been hiding there with Hitler for 4 months. Eva Braun, his mistress, was there as well. On April 29th, he finally married her officially. And on April 30th, at 2:30 p.m., they locked themselves inside a room in the bunker. Sometime later, a valet found them dead. The official chronology of events before and after Hitler's suicide has been established almost down to the minute. There are testimonies from participants and eyewitnesses. The Führer's adjutant helped the valet carry the bodies into the garden. There they were doused with gasoline. The fuel had been prepared in advance. The bodies were set on fire. The first attempt failed. Then a torch made from rolled-up papers and documents was brought in. Artillery shells were exploding nearby. The remains were placed into a shell crater and covered with dirt. Later, the bodies of 2 dogs were also found there. The German shepherds had been poisoned and laid beside their owner. What happened next is known from Soviet documents. They were declassified in 1980. On May 2nd, Soviet troops captured the Reich Chancellery and the bunker. Blood was found on a sofa in Hitler's office, and a few days later, unidentified remains were dug up from the crater. They were sent for examination. Fragments of jaws and skulls were used to establish the identities: Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. And this is where things become strange. The remains were reburied several times, and eventually destroyed completely. Only a fragment of skull with a bullet hole and a jawbone were preserved. It is believed that the jaw is now stored in the archives of the FSB, while the skull fragment is kept in the state archives. Everything was so secretive that Americans immediately found reasons to doubt the story. Some researchers believe that the Soviet Commission never discovered any bodies at all, and that the story of the autopsy and reburials was simply disinformation. Naturally, a story like this was bound to generate conspiracy theories. No body, no case. But there is another important detail. The jaw is genuine. It was identified first by the assistant of Hitler's personal dentist, and secondly, by his dental technician. French forensic experts finally settled the matter in 2018. They compared the jaw with Hitler's dental x-rays from 1944. As for the skull, there are plenty of speculation surrounding it. It has been claimed that the frontal bone is too thin for an adult male. That would mean either Hitler was a woman under 40 years old, or the skull was not his. More broadly, many people found the ordinary death of such a colossal historical figure difficult to believe. What do you mean he just shot himself? And that was it? And where did the Führer of the Third Reich go? The Potsdam Conference, July 1945. Joseph Stalin and U.S. Secretary of State James Burns are having an informal conversation. Both try to keep the tone casual. Burns asks, "So, is Hitler finished?" Stalin replies, "He is not dead. He escaped to Spain or Argentina. Burns later recounted this exchange in his memoirs. He did not clarify whether Stalin was joking or speaking seriously. 7 years later, President Dwight Eisenhower admitted that the United States had failed to find reliable proof of Hitler's death and suggested that the Führer may indeed have escaped Berlin. Both sides kept information about their investigations classified, and where there is uncertainty, there are rumors, speculation, and conspiracy theories. Another argument often cited by conspiracy theorists is the existence of the so-called Ratlines, secret escape routes for Nazis. These routes were allegedly organized by the Vatican. Many war criminals escaped through them. For example, the Dr. Death, Aribert Heim, who tortured prisoners in the Mauthausen concentration camp. He lived a peaceful life in Cairo under the name Tariq Farid Hussein and lived there quite comfortably. If they managed it, why couldn't Hitler? There are several major conspiracy theories about Hitler's fate. They all share the same basic storyline. Hitler escaped and died of natural causes, far from his homeland. But beyond that, the theories range from relatively plausible to utterly bizarre. One version claims that Hitler escaped while a body double died in the bunker. This theory was inspired by a strange discovery in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. A corpse with a bullet hole in its forehead and Hitler's distinctive mustache was found there. The dead man was identified as Gustav Weller, who, according to some accounts, had indeed worked as Hitler's double. Conspiracy theorists argue that there were several men with Hitler's toothbrush mustache, and cite as evidence a book titled The Strange Death of Adolf Hitler. The book was published in America in 1939. Its anonymous author, supposedly a Nazi officer, claimed that the real Hitler had been poisoned in 1938 and that 4 different doubles had replaced him ever since for different public appearances. At the time, the book was dismissed as a joke, but when the body of a double was allegedly discovered in 1945, the story of the burned bones in the shell crater suddenly took on a new life. There are even more exotic theories. Morning of the Magicians is a pseudoscientific work. It claims that the Nazis belonged to secret orders and occult organizations through which they learned ancient mysteries. Its author, Jacques Bergier, was a member of the French Resistance, a self-taught alchemist, and a remarkably imaginative storyteller. Morning of the Magicians is a pseudo-scientific work. It claims that the Nazis belonged to secret orders and occult organizations through which they learned ancient mysteries. And Hitler, the most respected among them, could not possibly have died on some ordinary couch in a bunker. The tabloid press eagerly embraced and expanded upon the idea. One of the wildest theories claimed that the Nazis made contact with the inhabitants of Agartha. A hidden kingdom populated by a race of superhumans, and only the most worthy people could enter their halls. People like Hitler. The laziest conspiracy theorists claimed that the entrance to Agartha was located directly inside the bunker, making Hitler's escape easy. Others believed that the Nazis discovered an entrance to Agartha in Antarctica, in a region known as New Swabia. Nazi Germany did indeed have a territory in Antarctica that was called New Swabia, but the objective there was a practical one: to claim territory and build a whaling base. Whale fat was an important raw material for the production of margarine and soap at the time, which is, of course, not nearly as interesting as the fantasy of an Arctic citadel, where Nazis store occult artifacts and prepare the advance of the Fourth Reich. According to one version, Hitler was transported to New Swabia by submarine. The German submarine fleet is proud to have built an impregnable fortress for the Führer at the other end of the world. The authenticity of this quote, in the finest traditions of the conspiracy genre, is close to zero. According to another version, which became one of the cornerstones of so-called esoteric Hitlerism, Hitler reached his Arctic base in a flying saucer. If that sounds insane to you, then yes, it absolutely is. Esoteric Hitlerism is a kind of New Age religion founded by French writer Savitri Devi, and that in 1945 he suffered only a temporary defeat, but would inevitably return with his fleet of flying saucers and establish an Aryan order on Earth. There is another version involving flying saucers. The story claims that Hitler traveled to a Nazi moon base. According to some accounts, the Nazis may indeed have possessed flying saucers, experimental disc-shaped aircraft. This was claimed, among others, by Giuseppe Belluzzo, a former member of Mussolini's government, as well as several lesser-known German engineers. Furthermore, as we know from the book Morning of the Magicians, therefore Nazi flying saucers could supposedly use the magical energy of Vril to transport Hitler to a moon base specifically intended for such purposes. The base cannot be seen through a telescope because it is located on the dark side of the moon. Unfortunately, the first mention of a Nazi moon base comes from the imagination of writer Robert Heinlein in one of his early stories. And the US space program, which was built with the help of former Nazi engineers, has still not succeeded in colonizing the moon. So this version can safely be crossed off the list of plausible explanations. But only one version deserved serious attention. Hitler, like many Nazis, may have escaped to Argentina, and, like many Nazis, may have lived there a long and happy life. Germans were welcomed in Argentina, and all the necessary conditions were created for them there. It is therefore unsurprising that after the war, a stream of refugees headed there. Some were useful to Western countries as specialists, while others simply arrived with large amounts of money. Argentine President Juan Perón played an active role in welcoming these distinguished guests. The Soviet Union possessed evidence of Adolf Hitler's death, and therefore did not search for him. Nevertheless, the CIA, and especially the FBI, investigated the most credible reports. One of the earliest known reports is the story of Adolf Schüttelmayer. The archive file consists of a single photograph and a short CIA informant report. In 1955, an agent met a man named Philippe Citroën, who claimed to be a former SS officer. Citroën boasted of a remarkable acquaintance with Hitler himself. Citroën then produced a photograph. In it, he was sitting next to an elderly man with a recognizable mustache and hairstyle. Written on the back of the photograph was the name Adolf Schüttelmayer. According to the report, the CIA agent failed to find any useful leads, and the case was closed. Much more interesting documents fell into the hands of conspiracy theorists after the FBI declassified its own files. In July 1945, an FBI informant reported information about a man who claimed to be an official of the Argentine government. The diplomat stated that he had been one of 4 people who welcomed Hitler and his entourage upon their arrival on the Argentine coast. He agreed to tell the full story in exchange for a guarantee that he would not be extradited to Argentina, where a coup d'etat had recently taken place. The story went as follows. Just a few weeks after the fall of Berlin, 2 submarines arrived in Argentina. Just a few weeks after the fall of Berlin, 2 submarines arrived in Argentina. On board were approximately 50 people, the elite of Germany's National Socialist Party. Among them stood out a man in his 50s. He was accompanied by a woman, apparently his wife, and several officials. The man complained that during the voyage, his asthma and stomach ulcer had worsened. Above his upper lip was visible stubble from a carelessly shaved mustache of a very distinctive shape. The informant claimed that he recognized him as Adolf Hitler. The group was placed on horseback and sent to the nearest town. The source stated that he knew where Hitler and two of his doubles lived. It was a house in the countryside, where a secret door concealed an entrance to a bunker. In his final report to Hoover, the agent concluded that the escape of Hitler and Eva Braun from Berlin, one day before Soviet troops entered the city, could not be ruled out. However, in his opinion, Argentina was an unlikely destination. The Führer spoke no foreign languages, and it would have been difficult for him to avoid attracting attention in South America.
The agent considered Switzerland a more probable destination.
Whether the FBI seriously considered that possibility remains unknown.
They will probably search the moon as well, whenever they get there.
Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write comments, and see you in the next episode.